I set out to design a few patches on the Subharmonicon this week that did three things. First, I wanted to learn what are the limits and the sound design abilities of the Subharmonicon. Second, I wanted patches that were performable, meaning they could change easily over time, or I could learn how to spice up any patch with what I learned from it. And finally, I wanted to learn how the mixer and the filter sections interacted with the rhythm sections on the Subharmonicon. This is actually the second Subharmonicon that I've owned. I sold the first one just weeks after I got it in 2020 when they first came out. In fact, I only bought this one because it was a screaming deal. I got it for $250. And although it's not really that pretty to look at, it doesn't shine like a brand new one does, it sounds fine and it works great. So it was a great deal, and I really wanted to try this year-long experiment with the Moog Sound Studio, trying to turn this into a performance system. My first impression of the Subharmonicon was that the patch bay was somewhat limited. It had no LFO, no sample and hold, and really no way of automating the resonance or any of the filter knobs, except of course the cutoff. Not to mention that the sub-oscillator section can get really muddy if you overdo it. I know a lot of people think that the Subharmonicon is this device that will help you with your creativity or it's incredibly inspiring. I did not have that the first go. So my first try at the Subharmonicon, I was disappointed. I was also trying to put my own idea of sound on the Subharmonicon the first time. So this time I learned my lesson and decided to find the sounds within the machine and bring them out. But with no true LFO, you're left to modulate the rhythm sequencer with envelope gates, triggers, and audio rate sources. Of course, the sub-oscillators can go very slow, so you do have that to work with. But that's where our work starts. Although all three of these patches today accomplished my goal in some degree, I think this first patch ended up being the best example of all three of my goals. I called it FMing Metalworks. This patch started out with an open patch bay and a pretty standard rhythm and melody for the Subharmonicon, I thought. So for my first patch, I added the VCO1 out to the cutoff in for some audio rate modulation of the cutoff. So then I added sequence 1 out to the VCA in. And this muddled up the sound a little bit in a good way. It seemed to add some noise, even though there's no noise generator in the Subharmonicon. It also modulated the timbre a bit. The rhythm got punched up too, probably because we're working with the VCA. This was enough to play with for a while, and really it's a patch all on its own, I think. But I decided to continue on, and I patched the VCO2 sub 2 out to the VCO1 in. And this really transformed the sound. It sounded almost like the image of a blacksmith or swordsmith hard at work. The faint sounds of the melody and its rhythm between the hammerheads. Throughout the patch, you can play with the cutoff and the resonance knob for variations on the tones. To be honest, I've never heard the Subharmonicon make sounds like this, and I had no expectation of it being able to do this. I was really surprised I was able to pull this out of it. The only issue I had with this patch is that it kind of lulls you into thinking that all these transitions are going to be very smooth. And this last patch to the VCO1 can actually be jarring. It completely changes the sound. So I made this mistake in performing this patch in composition number 5 on my channel. I would recommend that you fade out the Subharmonicon and then patch the VCO, then go ahead and fade it back in. This will also give you some nice variation in your composition. Coming out of the full patch is actually a lot easier because you're going into a melody from the sound. This patch is definitely a bit simpler, and it showed me some really fun envelope play. It actually really helped me understand how the envelope generators work on the Subharmonicon and how important they are. I think the general sound of this patch starts with a real classic Moog sound. It kind of really reminded me of the Stranger Things, the tone, not the melody, but just the tone. I started by patching sequence 1 out to VCO2 pulse width modulation, or VCO2 PWM, and then the VCF EG to the VCA. This really thickened up the sound a bit and gave the cutoff some control over the VCA. You could probably add to this patch by slowing down one of the sub-oscillators and then using it as a pseudo LFO, and then patching that into the cutoff. However, I decided to go outside of the Subharmonicon, and I used a ramp LFO from Pamela's Pro Workout to animate this cutoff. I really think you can do a lot more with this patch. I think the sub-oscillators can really drive this patch actually and make the VCA very rhythmic. In fact, I'm going to start patching these sub-oscillators all over this thing going forward. This last patch was actually about as far out as I could get the Subharmonicon. I'm calling it Ring Mod Subs. And although I think it does sound a bit like a ring mod, I'm not sure it really is a true ring mod. What I found really interesting about this patch was when it's all patched up, the main oscillator knobs are all but useless. You can control the sequencers with the 4 sub-oscillator knobs, and the envelope generators are driving the level of modulation. So it's a really fun patch to play with. Let's get started and patch the sequence 1 out to the VCO sub 1 in, and the sequence 2 out to the VCO 2 sub 1 in. I think this is what limits the main oscillator knob's effectiveness. Now let's patch up the envelope generators. The VCF EG to VCO 1 in, and VCA EG to VCO 2 in. Now we can control the sounds with the envelope knobs. Now here's where we're going to try to use one of the sub-oscillators as an LFO. So let's patch the VCO2 sub 2 into the cutoff. So the 2 main knobs are pretty much useless. I mean, you could turn them and play with them a bit, and they do add a little bit of sound, but not like they normally do. And the quantization button is completely irrelevant. We're really in West Coast synthesis territory with the Subharmonicon on this patch. I imagine you could also patch an LFO to the VCA in and get some really great rhythmic compression-like pumping sounds. So after this go around with the Subharmonicon, I really do think it's a great instrument. It can be frustrating if you do too much, and quite underwhelming if you do too little. It's easy to think of this synth as a one-trick pony, but this deep dive showed me how the Subharmonicon can actually team up with the Labyrinth as easily as it teams up with the Mother 32. And although the Subharmonicon is still not my favorite synth in this rack, these patches definitely showed me performable tweaks that can really spice up a long-form set with the Subharmonicon, like using the sub-oscillators as an LFO and adding it to the cutoff or the VCO as modulation. I also learned how powerful the envelope generators are on the Subharmonicon. So I hope these patches help you see the Subharmonicon a little bit differently and help you patch more creatively. I'd really like to hear how you patch the Subharmonicon in the comments. This is what's going to help us all grow as musicians in this community, and that's what my goal here is to do. I'm Steve, and this is Signals to Mars. Please like and subscribe for more performance patch ideas like this one.